latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I can't hear that song without thinking of Ozzie Guillen calling in Bobby Jenks from the bullpen to close the game. Better times for White Sox fans.
Oh, that's true.
It's interesting what's going on in California. Not talking about the LA riots. We might be talking about something else if not for the LA riots. Another manifestation of Governor Patrick Bateman's general incompetence. That's what happens when you're a doctrinaire and you've got the doctrine wrong. Now you have lawmakers in Sacramento revolting against Gavin Newsom's energy policy, an energy policy they, of course, endorsed. But the reason they're revolting, trying to walk away from the consequences of their policy choices, is because two major refineries in California recently announced they will shut down. And a study last month by USC Business School professor projected that gasoline prices could rise to more than $8 a gallon in California because of constricted supply. More self-inflicted wounds by eco-supremacists in California. Now they're saying that the Newsom climate diktats have we have a crisis on our hands that may have been self-created by the actions perhaps taken by the state by regulators. These are members of the California State Assembly huffing and puffing to try to avoid any sort of accountability for their participation. Yeah, imagine that. Lessons not learned in pursuit of tilting at windmills, literally and figuratively. For more on this, pleased to be joined again by Bjorn Lomborg for a discussion on energy policy. Bjorn is the president of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank and author of Best Things First. Bjorn, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan and Amy, it's great to be back.
So we see this happen over and over again. We've seen it in Germany. Now we see it in California, where the good intentions of those who are going to save the planet from fossil fuels run into the reality of energy needs for their constituents.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a real problem that they're trying to fix, but they're just trying to fix it so blatantly badly. And again, remember, there are real costs to changing over your energy supply from something that's cheap and reliable to something that's not. And so again, you can decide to say, well, we're rich enough, we're just going to live through it. We're going to pay $8 a gallon of gasoline, and we're fine with that. But the reality, of course, is most people, even in California, are not going to be fine with that. But you're never going to be able to convince the rest of the world to do this. And so unless you just want to have been doing, pointless virtue signaling, you really have to start thinking about how do you get China, India, Africa, all the rest of the world, which is going to dominate emissions in the 21st century along. And you're not going to do that by doing incredibly expensive, pointless policies. You're going to do that through innovation.
Well, what's going on with families in Germany and the UK that, have cheaper solar and wind power added to their national power mix?
Well, so a lot of people who put up solar panels are really happy about it, but that's no surprise because they obviously get enormous subsidies for their own solar panels, and they get to scrounge off on the grid when there's no sun. They get the best of both worlds, but what they're really doing is they're getting everybody else to subsidize them. So in California and in Ontario, we have several other studies that show you have massive subsidies going typically to fairly well-off people to get them to buy these solar panels, feel good about themselves, get cheap energy when the sun is shining, and also cheap energy when the sun is not shining, and then everybody else, typically poorer people, will be paying for that. That's just, astoundingly stupid. Plus, of course, it's actually a really ineffective way to try to tackle global warming. So, it ticks all the wrong boxes. And again, it's not the way you're going to convince everyone else to fix climate change.
Well, it seems to me that's one of the first things that needs to be addressed is addressing the premise that green energy is cheap and reliable. It's very much like Voltaire described the Holy Roman Empire as neither holy nor Roman. Green energy is neither cheap nor reliable, and we found that out. Spain and Portugal found that out recently.
Yes. So obviously it's not reliable in the sense that you can never know, say 10 days in advance, whether you're going to have wind or solar. Now, there's a reasonable chance you might have some solar in the daytime. You know that you're not going to have any in the nighttime. And the reality is you basically need to buy a full backup for both of these, which basically means you have two systems. But not only that, now, that alone makes it more costly, but what the Spanish and Portuguese blackout showed is that when you have a lot of solar and wind, you make the system more unstable, because once it starts becoming unstable, and we don't yet know whether that was caused by solar and wind or something else, but then you can't bring it back to stability because there's no spinning reserves. Fundamentally, in the times of old, we had lots of big wheels spinning, producing electricity, and they made sure that the frequency of the net stayed pretty much the same. We no longer have that, and that by itself, the Reuters estimate, is going to cost Europe another couple of trillion dollars. So that's an enormous extra cost. So not only is it not stable, not only is it not cheap, it's even more costly than we thought.
And just to, the comparisons too, and you go through this in a piece you penned for the New York Post about solar and wind. Germany, 34 cents per kilowatt hour is more than twice the U.S. cost, nearly 4 times the Chinese price, where you have in the U.S. and China, there's some similarities and some differences, but the bottom line is there's a mix of energy that is intended to provide the sort of reliable energy sources that are required to power big industrial economies.
Exactly. And actually, if you plot all of the countries that we have data for, so 70 countries, from China and U.S. to the European Union to Germany and the U.K., which has the biggest cost in 2023, it actually turns out that the more solar and wind you have, the higher the cost. There's no places where you have lots of solar and wind and you have really low prices. So in Indonesia, where you have almost no solar and wind, you actually have some of the lowest prices. You have less than 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And in Germany, as you point out, 34 cents, and in the UK, it was actually above 40 cents. And this is all the kilowatt hours, not just for consumers, which are typically much more expensive, but also for industries. So this is the weighted average. It's just simply incredibly costly to have more solar and wind. And we know this is not a model. This is the real world. There are no places where you have lots of solar and wind and low prices.
And so do you see any sort of pivoting or the beginning of pivoting by these Western European nations that have gotten it so wrong?
There's a lot of unease, but right now, no, the sense is, just like you were talking about with the Californians, it's more sort of, well, we got to find a way without admitting that we were wrong to make this work. And, the blackout probably means that we're going to say, oh, okay, then we're going to pay another couple of $1 trillion. And eventually you'll run out of trillions of dollars to spend on this. So right now, the European Union has promised to cut 55% of its emissions by 2030. That's going to be hard, but doable. By 2040, we promised to cut 90 to 95% of our emissions. That's going to be virtually impossible, and it's going to be so costly to do it. So sometimes between 2030 and 2040, you're going to see a lot of countries either throw out their existing governments or just simply vote for other people who will say, no, we're not going to pay.
So rather than these quixotic misadventures, the environmental groups and some of these Western nations that are captive to them are on currently, what should they be pursuing in the interests of reducing pollution, providing reliable energy to people that don't otherwise currently enjoy it, and improving quality of life. What are the sorts of, I consider you, I'm sure you consider yourself an environmentalist. What are the sorts of things that real environmentalists that are looking for a sustainable future for human beings and the planet should be focused on?
We should be focusing on what always solves all big problems: innovation. Look, if you can make a green new energy source cheaper than fossil fuels, you've won. Everyone will switch. So take, for instance, fourth generation nuclear, which could be these new small modular type approved in the factory, and then you just produce hundreds of thousands of them and swarm the whole world with them. If we can make them cheaper, and we don't know that yet, but if you could make it cheaper than fossil fuels, everyone would buy them, not just rich, well-meaning Californians, but also the Africans, the Indians, and the Chinese, and everybody else around the world. So the reality here is it's not about making yourself feel virtuous and feeling really wonderful about your little private choices in Chicago or in California, but this is about making the innovations that will make everyone else want to do it. Now, I'm not going to promise that we're going to fix fourth generation nuclear. It could be fusion. It could be solar and wind with lots and lots of batteries, but we need a lot of development. There's a lot of potential, but we're not there right now. So instead of trying to switch over while it's incredibly expensive and you're only going to get Californians on board, we should be investing a lot more in green energy innovation. The beautiful thing is this is going to cost maybe 5% of what we're currently spending on climate policies, and it'll have a much greater chance to actually do some good, because it's not just about switching in the U.S. or in Europe, but also switching everywhere else, which frankly matters much more in the 21st century.
Now, Bjorn, before we let you go, I wanted to ask you about the Swedish sister, Greta Thunberg. She was deported from Israel this morning. Well, after they intercepted this, Gaza-bound celebrity aid boat. Why do you think she just went from being an advocate for the climate to becoming a pro-Hamas supporter? Is it the attention and the power?
They called it the selfie boat,
yes.
Which I thought was quite hilarious.
Yeah.
The reality, of course, what that really shows is I actually have quite a bit of respect for Greta, because she pointed out that all my politicians tell me this is the end of the world, and yet they're doing very little. And that was correct. Of course, it was because the politicians were lying, not because they weren't doing enough. But, respect for a schoolgirl to actually point that out and make a lot of people hear that. But what I think it really shows is she has gone from saying, oh, my God, the world is ending and we're all going to die, to, oh, I'm going to worry about the Palestine issue. Mm-hmm. Well, if you really believed this was the end of the world, you'd probably stick with it, wouldn't you? Yeah. It just seems like it was more an indication of this was the fresh flavor of the day or the week or the month. But in reality, it sort of uncovers that this is not the most important problem in the world. We're not all going to die. It's a problem, yes. It's not the end of the world. And that matters, because then we can stop worrying intensely, and we can stop making really stupid policies and start making smarter ones.
Yeah, maybe she'll make a speech scolding herself for her, lethargic action in saving the planet. One other thing, though, too, that's going on that has to put pressure on these green energy ideologues is the economic imperatives associated with the AI revolution, the energy needs, where they're projecting a 30 to 50% increase in the West in terms of energy capacity to meet the needs of the artificial intelligence revolution. And if you're not providing that kind of capacity, then you could get left behind. And that's got to be frightening to some of these politicians, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, what that shows you is no AI center is going to say, sure, we're fine with you just providing, electricity when the sun is shining or if the wind is blowing, and otherwise there's going to be none. Of course, they're not actually doing that. They want reliable power, and also they want cheap power. And so, again, we're back to saying, don't try to win this by making these virtue signaling policies that are going to be very expensive and probably going to lose you some of the AI opportunities, but is not going to solve climate change. You need to focus on innovation, because it's only if we find a cheap, reliable, green energy that can actually outcompete fossil fuels, that we will get a solution everyone will adopt.
Bjorn Lomborg is the president of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank, author of the book Best Things First. Bjorn, thank you as always.
Great to talk to you guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, it's Sean Thompson. You know, there's an old saying out there. Small hinges swing big doors. In other words, doing little things right can have a big result. Tom Fortino and the team of Alpha Wealth Group have been helping people retire since 2010 and have found that while many have an investment plan, very few have a tax plan. And that can be the element that makes a huge difference when it comes to money you'll have to spend in your retirement. What if you had a plan that protected you against future tax increases